They say Christmas is a time for miracles, but for a mother sitting alone in a room full of people, it can be the loneliest night of the year. I never asked for gratitude. I never asked for a check to pay me back for the years I spent hungry so he could eat. But I never expected that the boy whose hand I held through the darkest nights of our lives would one day look at me, across a table full of crystal glasses and expensive wine, and say the words that finally broke me. We were at his large oak dining table. I had accidentally folded my napkin, instinctively trying to save it because it looked so nice, a habit from years of making things last. My son, David, laughed, a dry, sharp sound. He gestured to his wife and their wealthy friends. "Mom, stop," he said, rolling his eyes. "Put the napkin down. God, you act like we're still on welfare. It's pathetic. Stop acting like a pauper, it's embarrassing everyone." The room went silent. The guests looked down at their plates. He didn't just call me cheap, he mocked the survival instinct that had kept him alive. That laughter didn't just hurt my feelings, it erased my history. That night changed everything between us. But to understand why that comment cut so deep, you have to understand the world he was so desperate to forget. You have to go back to 1982. Forget the warm house with the heated floors. Go back to a drafty, one-room apartment above a hardware store where the linoleum was peeling and the wind whistled through the window frame. I was 22, entirely alone and terrified. There was no safety net, no parents to call, no partner to lean on, just me, a colicky baby, and a radiator that hissed but never gave off heat. I don't need to look in a mirror to remember that girl. I can feel her. I remember the constant, low-level nausea of panic. The kind of fear that isn't poetic, it's physical. It's the feeling of opening your wallet and seeing $3 bills and realizing you have 4 days until payday. I became a mathematician of misery. That was my full-time job. I didn't just worry about money, I calculated every breath we took. I remember standing in the grocery aisle for 15 minutes, staring at 2 loaves of bread. The white bread was 89 cents. The whole wheat was 99, 10 cents. I stood there, shifting my weight on tired feet, debating whether the 10 cents was worth the extra fiber that might keep my son full for an hour longer. I bought the white bread. I saved the 10 cents to put toward a jar of peanut butter. I knew the price of everything. A bus ride was $1.50. If I walked the 4 miles to work, that was a quart of milk. So I walked. I walked in the rain. I walked in shoes with cardboard insoles because the rubber had worn through. I walked until my heels bled into my socks, and when I got home, I smiled at David and told him I had a nice exercise. I lied to him every day. That was my other job, the great pretender. One night in mid-January stands out. The temperature had dropped to single digits. I had chosen to pay the rent instead of the electric bill, a gamble I lost when the lights flickered and died at 5:00 p.m. The apartment plunged into darkness. The silence of the refrigerator stopping, that hum you don't notice until it's gone, was the loudest sound in the world. The heat went with it. David, just a toddler then, started to whimper. He could feel the shift in the air. The cold rushed in instantly, aggressive and biting. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to curl into a ball and cry until someone came to save us. But no one was coming. If I panicked, he would be traumatized. So I lit the only candle we had, a stubby vanilla-scented thing left over from a better life. I forced a laugh, clapping my hands together to hide the shaking. "Look, Davy," I chirped, my voice sounding too high, too bright. "The lights are boring. We're going on an adventure. We're going camping right here in the living room." I grabbed the blankets from my bed. the heavy wool ones I'd found at Goodwill, and draped them over the kitchen chairs to build a fort. We crawled inside. The space was small, lit only by the flickering candle. "We're Eskimos in an igloo," I told him. "Isn't this magic?" I told him stories about dragons that breathed fire to keep villages warm. I made shadow puppets on the wall of our blanket fort. My stomach was growling so loudly, a deep, hollow rumble, that I had to sing songs to cover the noise. We sang "You Are My Sunshine" until my throat was raw. He believed me. He looked at me with those big, trusting eyes, thinking his mother was the most fun person in the world. He fell asleep curled into my chest, warm and safe, dreaming of magic. But while he slept, the reality set in. I couldn't sleep. The cold seeped through the floorboards. I wrapped the best parts of the blanket around him, leaving my back exposed to the freezing air. I sat there for 6 hours, watching the candle burn down, terrified that if the flame went out, the darkness would swallow us whole. By 3:00 a.m., I couldn't feel my toes. My fingers were stiff claws, blue at the tips. I was shivering so violently that I had to bite my lip to keep my teeth from chattering and waking him up. I bit until I tasted copper. When the sun finally came up, David woke up warm and happy. "Camping again tonight, Mama?" he asked. I couldn't answer right away because my jaw was locked from the cold. I had to massage my face just to speak. I smiled, a painful, stiff grimace. "Maybe, baby, we'll see." That morning, I caught a fever. My body, weakened by weeks of skipping meals and that freezing night, finally gave out. But I had to go to work. If I didn't work, we didn't eat. So I dragged myself to the diner, serving coffee with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, sweating through my uniform while freezing on the inside. I did it because I had made a vow. He will never know. I decided poverty would stop at my skin. I would be the filter. I would absorb the cold, the hunger, and the humiliation so he could be a normal child. But you can't build a life on secrets forever. The body keeps the score. And as David grew older, it wasn't just the cold I had to hide. The sacrifices started to get more dangerous. The winter he turned 7, the math finally didn't add up. I had pushed my luck too far. It wasn't just a matter of skipping a meal anymore. It was the day the school nurse called me, her voice suspicious and cold, asking questions I was terrified to answer. That was the day I realized that my love alone might not be enough to save us, and that my pride might actually be the thing that destroyed us. The school nurse didn't look me in the eye when I walked into her small, antiseptic-smelling office. She was typing on a file, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. David was sitting on the cot in the corner, swinging his legs, looking pale but otherwise okay. He gave me a weak wave. "Mrs. Miller," the nurse said, finally turning her chair. Her voice wasn't mean, but it was tired. It was the voice of a woman who had seen too many children slip through the cracks. "David fainted in gym class today. He said he didn't have lunch money. Again." The shame that washed over me was hot and prickling, like a sunburn. It started at my neck and crawled up to my cheeks. I gripped my purse strap. The cheap vinyl was peeling, sticking to my sweating palms. Inside that purse was 75 cents. A standard school lunch was $1.25. "He forgot it on the counter," I lied. The words tasted like ash. "I was in such a rush this morning. You know how it is, single working mom." I forced a chuckle, but it came out as a dry cough. The nurse looked at me. She looked at my worn coat, my scuffed shoes, and then back at David. She knew, of course she knew. You can't hide poverty from the people who weigh and measure your children. "He needs protein, Mrs. Miller," she said softly, handing me a slip of paper. "There are programs. The state can provide free lunch tickets. You just have to sign this." I looked at that paper like it was a contagious disease. Free lunch, the yellow ticket. The ticket that screamed to every other kid in the cafeteria line, "This boy is poor. This boy is a charity case." I shook my head, backing away. "No, thank you, we're fine. It's just a temporary cash flow issue. My check clears tomorrow." I took David's hand and walked him out of the school. I felt the nurse's eyes burning into my back. As soon as we were outside, I knelt down and zipped his coat up to his chin. "I'm sorry, Davy," I whispered. "It's okay, Mom," he said, his voice small. I was that hungry anyway. My stomach just felt funny. He was lying to protect me, just like I was lying to protect him. We were already partners in this silent conspiracy. That afternoon, I walked to a pawn shop 3 towns over so no one would recognize me. I pawned my only piece of real jewelry, a small gold locket my grandmother had given me on my 16th birthday. It felt like selling a piece of my soul, but the man behind the counter gave me $40. In 1983, $40 was a lifeline, but I didn't run out and buy a steak. I was poor, but I wasn't stupid. I went to the bulk grocery store. I bought a 20-pound sack of rice, 5 pounds of dried beans, a gallon of generic peanut butter, and 3 boxes of powdered milk. I made sure our pantry was full of staples that would keep his belly full for a month. But then, with the last $4, I bought a small roast chicken. Not a big one, just enough for 2. That night, David ate chicken and rice with real butter. I watched him eat, my own stomach twisting with a hunger that had become my constant companion, feeling a strange, fierce victory. He wasn't a free lunch kid. He was my son, and I would feed him, even if I had to sell everything I owned. But money runs out faster thaw. And you think, and the winter was long. I found a job cleaning offices in the city, but it was 5 miles from our apartment. The bus fare was $1.50 each way. That was $3 a day, $15 a week, $60 a month. $60 was the electric bill. $60 was new shoes for David when his toes started poking through the canvas. So I stopped taking the bus. I would wake up at 4:30 a.m. I would leave David with Mrs. Gable next door, a kind, elderly woman who accepted my homemade apple pies as payment for watching him for an hour before school, and I would walk. 5 miles in the morning, 5 miles in the evening. I want you to imagine walking 10 miles a day in shoes that cost $9 at a discount bin. The soles were thin rubber, and I had stuffed them with cardboard to add a layer of cushion. But cardboard disintegrates when it gets wet. One evening in November, a freezing rain started to fall. I was halfway home, crossing the bridge over the river. The water had soaked through the cheap leather of my shoes and turned the cardboard into a mushy pulp. I felt a sharp, stinging burn on my right heel. The wet sock was rubbing against a blister that had burst. I could feel the specific, sickening warmth of my own blood mixing with the freezing rainwater inside my shoe. Every step was a fresh injury. It felt like walking on glass. I stopped in the middle of the bridge. The wind whipped my hair across my face. I gripped the cold metal railing, my knuckles white. I was 23 years old and my body felt broken. My stomach was a hollow cave. I hadn't eaten since a piece of toast at 5:00 a.m. I looked down at the black water swirling below. It looked so peaceful, so quiet. "I can't do this," I whispered to the empty air. "I literally cannot take another step. I am done." It would have been so easy to just sit down, to let the cold take me, to stop fighting the math that never added up. But then an image flashed in my mind, not of myself, but of David's face. The way his eyes lit up when I walked through the door, the way he believed I was invincible. If I sat down, who would make his dinner? If I stopped, who would help him with his spelling words? If I gave up, he would become a ward of the state. He would be the boy with the yellow lunch ticket, alone in the world. I forced one foot forward. The pain shot up my leg, hot and sharp. I took another step. 1, 2, 3, just get to 10. Okay, do 10 more. I walked the rest of the way home on pure, stubborn love. When I finally unlocked our apartment door, I had to lean against the frame to keep from collapsing. David was sitting on the floor, playing with a cardboard box he had turned into a spaceship. He looked up, his face breaking into that wide, gap-toothed smile that was the only sunlight in my life. "Mommy, you're home," he cheered. He ran to me. I was wet, freezing, bleeding into my shoes, and smelling of bleach. But he hugged me like I was a queen returning from a crusade. "I saved you something," he whispered, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a single, squashed saltine cracker wrapped in a napkin. It was mostly crumbs. "Mrs. Gable gave us crackers for a snack," he explained seriously, his big eyes searching my face. "I wasn't hungry for this one. I thought you might want it." He hadn't eaten it because he knew. On some level, my 7-year-old son knew that his mother was hungry. He was starving too. He was a growing boy, but he had saved it for me. I took that crumbled cracker with a shaking hand. I had to turn my face away so he wouldn't see the tears tracking through the grime on my cheeks. I ate it. It was dry and salty, but in that moment, it was the best thing I had ever tasted. "Thank you, baby," I choked out. "It's delicious." As I swallowed those crumbs, I made a silent vow to him, one that burned hotter than the fever starting to rise in my blood. "One day," I promised in my head, looking at his trusting face, "one day you will eat steak. One day you will buy the whole box of crackers, and you won't even look at the price tag. I will build a ladder out of my own bones if I have to, just so you can climb out of this hole." I looked at him, so small yet so perceptive, and I felt a fierce, burning pride. We didn't need their charity. We had each other. But as I looked at his hands, hands that were growing bigger every day, I realized he wasn't going to be a baby forever. He used to tell me he was going to be my knight. He used to say, "Me and you against the world, Mom." But the world has a way of twisting loyalty when you're poor. As he got older, the us against the world mentality started to change. He stopped seeing us as a team. He started seeing money as the only way to be a man. And the first time he looked at my worn-out shoes with shame instead of love. That was the beginning of the end. Before the silence grew between us, and long before the shame set in, there was a golden season. It's the S. Season I hold onto most tightly when the nights get long and my mind starts to wander. It was the time when David wasn't just my son, he was my partner, my little defender. You see, children see the world through a lens of absolute truth until the world teaches them to squint. And for the first 12 years of his life, David looked at me and didn't see a tired cleaning lady in a polyester uniform. He saw a hero. I remember when he was 10 years old. I was working 2 jobs then, cleaning offices at night and working the register at a grocery store during the day. I was always tired. My hands were always chapped from the bleach and the winter air. I had a habit of hiding my hands in my pockets because I was embarrassed by how red and rough they looked compared to the other mothers who came through my checkout line with their manicured nails and diamond rings. One afternoon, I was late picking him up from school. The bus had broken down, and I had to run the last 6 blocks. When I arrived at the playground, breathless and sweating, wearing my faded blue smock with the store logo on it, I saw a group of boys standing near the swings. David was in the middle of them. He was smaller than the others. My poor nutrition while I was pregnant probably saw to that. But he was standing tall, his fists clenched at his sides. I hurried over, my heart in my throat, terrified he was getting bullied. As I got closer, I heard the biggest boy, a kid with new sneakers and a cruel laugh, point at me. "There she is," the boy sneered. "David's mom is the checkout lady. My dad says she bags our groceries. She probably eats the damaged cans for dinner." The other boys laughed. It was a stupid, childish insult, but it stung because it was close to the truth. We did eat the dented cans I got at a discount. I expected David to look down. I expected him to cry or run to me to hide. Instead, he took a step forward, shoving his chest right into the bigger boy's face. "Shut up," David yelled, his voice cracking with rage. "You take that back. My mom works harder than your dad ever has. Your dad just sits in a chair all day. My mom actually works. She keeps this whole town running." The boy pushed him. David pushed back, swinging wildly. It turned into a scuffle in the dirt, a tangle of limbs and shouting, before a teacher blew a whistle and pulled them apart. When I walked David home that day, he had a scrape on his cheek and his shirt was torn. I was fussing over him, trying to clean the dirt off his face with a tissue and some spit, apologizing profusely. "I'm so sorry, Davy. I'm so sorry you have to deal with that," I said, feeling that familiar guilt rising in my chest like bile. He stopped walking. He took my rough, chapped hand in his smooth ones. He didn't care who saw, and he squeezed it hard. "Don't say sorry, Mom," he told me, looking me dead in the eye, his face still flushed from the fight. "I don't care what they say. I'm proud of you. They don't know anything." That was the boy I raised. He was sensitive, yes, but he had a core of steel when it came to his mother. We were a team. We were the Miller duo. We had inside jokes that no one else understood. We would walk through the wealthy neighborhoods on Sunday afternoons, our cheapest form of entertainment, and pick out which houses we were going to buy when we made it big. That was our favorite game, the dream house. We would walk past the Victorian mansions on Elm Street, the ones with the wraparound porches and the stained glass windows. I knew the insides of those houses because I cleaned 3 of them. I knew which families were unhappy despite their money, but I never told David that. I let him have the fantasy. "That one," he would say, pointing to a massive white house with a manicured lawn. "That's the one, Mom. It has a library for me and a garden for you." "It's beautiful," I'd say, playing along. "But who's going to clean all those windows?" "I'll hire 1,000 people," he'd declare, spreading his arms wide. "You will never lift a finger again. You're going to sit on that porch and drink iced tea and read books all day." "I promise." He meant it. I could see it in his eyes. He didn't want the house for the status, he wanted it for me. He saw how hard I worked. He saw me soaking my swollen ankles in a bucket of ice water at night. His ambition wasn't born out of greed, it was born out of love. He wanted to rescue me. But the tragedy of raising a child in poverty is that eventually they have to leave the bubble you built for them. They have to go out into the real world, and the real world is cruel to people without money. The shift happens slowly, like the seasons changing. But if I look back, I can pinpoint the exact autumn when the air turned cold between us. It was when he turned 14. He had won a scholarship to a private preparatory high school. It was a huge achievement, my brilliant boy, getting the education he deserved. I was so proud I cried for 3 days. Wise, but St. Jude's was a different universe. Suddenly, David wasn't just the smart kid in a public school. He was the poor kid in a rich school. He was surrounded by boys who got BMWs for their 16th birthdays and girls who spent their summers in Europe. I tried to keep up. I ironed his shirts until they were crisp. But I couldn't buy him the lifestyle. I couldn't buy him the skiing trips. One evening, I offered to drop him off at a school football game. It was raining, a cold, miserable drizzle. "No, I'll walk," he said quickly, too quickly. "Don't be silly, David," I said, grabbing my keys. "It's pouring, the car runs fine, I'll drive you." My car was a rusted beat-up sedan, 20 years old, with a muffler that sounded like a dying tractor. It chugged and popped. It was ugly, but it ran. "Mom, seriously, I want to walk," he insisted, his voice tight. "David, get in the car," I said. He got in, but he sat slumped against the door, staring out the window. As we got closer to the stadium, the expensive SUVs were lining up, parents dropping off kids in sleek, silent cars. "Drop me here," David said suddenly. We were 2 blocks away. The rain was coming down harder. "Here, David, the entrance is way up there. You'll get soaked." "Just stop the car," he snapped. I slammed on the brakes, startled. The muffler rattled loudly in the sudden quiet of the street. Clunk, clunk, hiss. He unbuckled his seatbelt and grabbed the door handle. Then he froze. He looked at me, and for a second the anger in his face faltered. He looked at my worn coat. He looked at the cracked dashboard. He didn't look at me with hate. He looked at me with pity. He looked at me and realized that I was the thing that made him different. I was the stain on his new life. I need the exercise," he mumbled. "Thanks for the ride." He opened the door and ran out into the rain, pulling his hood up, keeping his head down so no one would recognize him coming out of that car. I sat there for a long time, listening to the windshield wipers slap back and forth. Swish clunk, swish clunk. I looked down at my hands gripping the steering wheel. They were red, chapped from the bleach, the knuckles swollen from years of scrubbing floors. For the first time in my life, I didn't see them as strong hands that provided for my son. I saw them as ugly. I saw them through his eyes, rough, poor, and embarrassing. His shame had finally infected me. I put the car in gear and turned around. That was the night I realized I wasn't just fighting poverty anymore. I was fighting for my son's soul, and I was losing. But I didn't know yet just how much it would cost me. That night, he walked home in the rain rather than ride with me. A few years later, he wouldn't just ask me to stop the car. He would ask me to stop being his mother entirely, unless I had a check in my hand. The acceptance letter came on a Tuesday. I remember because that was my double shift day at the hospital, and my feet were throbbing so badly I had to soak them in Epsom salts just to stand upright. David came running up the stairs, waving a thick white envelope like it was a flag of victory. "I got in, Mom, I got in." He was 18, glowing with that invincible energy of youth. We danced around our tiny kitchen. We cried. For a moment, the world felt bright. But later that night, after he had gone to sleep dreaming of lecture halls and campus lawns, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the financial aid paperwork. There was a number at the bottom. Even with the scholarship, even with the grants, the family contribution was a number that made my breath catch in my throat. It was more money than I had made in the last 2 years combined. But I looked at the bedroom door where my son was sleeping. I thought about the boys in the SUVs. I thought about the shame on his face in the rain. "He is going," I whispered to the empty room. "I don't care if I have to scrub every floor in this city. he is going. And so, David went to college to learn about philosophy and economics, and I went to war with my own body. I took a third job. I started cleaning office buildings from 6:00 p.m. to 2:00 a.m., then I would sleep for 4 hours and get up to work the breakfast shift at the diner. My life became a blur of ammonia, bleach, and coffee grounds. I stopped buying new clothes entirely. I stopped going to the doctor. When a tooth started aching in the back of my mouth, a sharp, throbbing pain that kept me awake, I didn't go to the dentist. A root canal cost $800. $800 was his meal plan for the semester. So I went to the drugstore and bought a tiny bottle of clove oil. I soaked a cotton ball and bit down on it, burning my gums, praying the nerve would die. I walked around for 3 months smelling like a Christmas ham, swallowing aspirin and blood, just so he could eat in the cafeteria. I was a ghost in my own life. I existed only to generate the checks that I mailed to him. Every first of the month. The first year, the calls were frequent. But by his sophomore year, the conversations shifted. They weren't about "How are you, Mom?" anymore. They were transactions. "Mom, there's a networking trip to DC. It's expensive, but I have to go if I want an internship." "Mom, I need a new laptop. The software for my stats class won't run on the old one. It's an emergency." I sent the money. I always sent the money. I drained my small emergency fund. I skipped utility payments. I told myself it was for his future. Then came Thanksgiving of his junior year. I had spent 2 days cooking. I made his favorites, sweet potato casserole with the marshmallows on top, green bean almondine, a turkey so big I had to wrestle it into the oven. I had even bought a new tablecloth to hide the scratches on the table. When he pulled into the driveway, I looked out the window and frowned. He wasn't in a friend's car. He wasn't in a taxi. He was driving a sleek, silver rental car. He walked through the door and my heart both swelled and sank. He looked handsome. He was taller, broader, but he was wearing a cashmere sweater, soft, charcoal gray, looking like it cost a fortune. I hugged him, smelling his expensive cologne, but my mind was doing the math. I sent him $300 last week, I thought, my stomach twisting. He said it was for emergency textbooks because the library was out of stock. That sweater is my $300. That rental car is my toothache. But I didn't say it. I didn't want to ruin the moment. I wanted to believe he deserved nice things. "Hey, Mom," he said, looking around the apartment. He didn't take off his coat immediately. He stood there like a guest. "Place looks small. Did you move the furniture?" "No, honey, same furniture," I said, trying to smile. We sat down to eat. I was so excited to hear about his classes. "So tell me everything," I beamed, piling potatoes onto his plate. "Are you still studying that, what was it? Socrates." David stopped chewing. He didn't look up. He was looking at his phone, his thumbs scrolling through emails. He let out a short, bored sigh. "Socrates, Mom," he corrected, his voice flat. "It's pronounced Socrates, and I'm mostly doing macroeconomics now." "Oh, right, macronomics," I stumbled, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "Well, you sound very smart, just like the men on the news." He finally looked up, but not at me. He looked at the glass of iced tea I had poured him. He grimaced. "Mom, is there sugar in this?" "Just a little, it's sweet tea, the way you like it." "I don't drink sugar anymore," he said, pushing the glass away like it was contaminated. "It's poison. And honestly, looking at all this," he gestured vaguely at the feast I had spent my rent money on, "it's just so heavy. You really need to stop cooking like this. It's unhealthy." "But it's Thanksgiving," I whispered. "It's tradition." He rolled his eyes. "It's not tradition, Mom. It's low class. It's like you're still shopping with food stamps. You need to elevate yourself. People don't eat this garbage anymore unless they have to. Low class. The words hit me harder than a physical blow. He didn't shout them. He said them casually, returning his attention to his phone screen. He didn't even realize he had slapped me. I looked at my hands resting on the cheap tablecloth. They were cracked, the nails cut short, the skin stained from the beats. They were the hands that had scrubbed toilets so he could sit there in his stolen cashmere sweater and call my love garbage. I cleared the table in silence. He didn't offer to help. That night, through the thin walls, I heard him on the phone. "Yeah, I'm at my mom's," he was saying. A pause, a laugh. "No, man, I can't leave yet. I have to put in the time. But God, it's depressing here. It smells like old cooking oil and desperation. I just want to get back to the city." I stood in the hallway, holding a basket of his laundry, washed with the expensive detergent I bought just for him, and I felt something inside me fracture. I wanted to walk in there and scream. I wanted to show him the empty bottle of clove oil. I wanted to say, "I smell like desperation because I sold my dignity to buy your future." But I didn't, because I was his mother and I was a coward for his love. He left the next morning. I watched the silver rental car disappear down the street, and I realized I had succeeded. I had scrubbed the poverty off him so thoroughly that he couldn't stand to be near me anymore, because I was the only stain left. That was hard, but the real break hadn't happened yet. The distance was there, yes, but he still needed me. He still needed the checks. That changed 2 years later. He graduated, he got the big job in the city, and he stopped asking for money. I thought that would bring us closer. I thought, now we can just be mother and son. I was wrong. When he stopped needing my money, he stopped needing me. And he met her. Her name was Jessica. And unlike me, she didn't have calluses on her hands or clove oil on her breath. She had a platinum card, a father in politics, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. She was the final wedge, and she knew exactly where to strike. The first time I met Jessica, I knew I was in trouble. David didn't bring her to my apartment. He didn't even bring her to the diner where we used to get pancakes on Sundays. He arranged for us to meet at a bistro downtown, one of those neutral ground places where the water comes in glass bottles, and the menus don't have prices listed next to the entrees. I had spent 2 hours getting ready. I wore my best Sunday dress, a blue floral print I had found at a consignment shop years ago. I curled my hair. I even put on a little lipstick, blotting it carefully so it wouldn't be too bright. I wanted to look like a mother he could be proud of. But when Jessica walked in, I felt the color drain from my face. She was beautiful, yes, blonde, tall, polished to a shine like a new car. But it wasn't her beauty that intimidated me, it was her confidence. She wore a beige pantsuit that looked like it was tailored specifically for her body, and she didn't have a single hair out of place. When she shook my hand, her grip was firm, cool, and dry. It was a hand that had never scrubbed a floor. It was a hand that had never wrung out a mop, never patched a pair of jeans, never soaked in ice water after a 12-hour shift. "It is so charming to finally meet you, Mrs. Miller," she said. Her voice was smooth, like expensive chocolate. "David has told me some stories." She smiled, but her eyes did a quick, vertical scan of me. From my curled hair down to my floral dress to my scuffed, sensible shoes. It took less than a second, but I felt it. I felt her categorize me, quaint, harmless, lower class. "He's told me so much about you, too," I lied. He hadn't. He had barely mentioned her until 2 weeks ago. Dinner was an exercise in humiliation. Jessica did most of the talking. She talked about her father's summer home in the Hamptons. She talked about her job at a PR firm where she managed crisis communications. She talked about wine pairings and art galleries. I just nodded. I smiled until my cheeks hurt. I tried to cut my chicken quietly so the knife wouldn't screech against the plate. At one point, I squinted at the menu, trying to read the dessert options. The candle on the table was dim, and the letters were swimming before me. My eyes had been getting worse lately, a blurring cloudiness that made the world look like it was underwater. "Oh, David," Jessica said, her voice dropping to a loud, concerned whisper. "Does your mother need glasses?" She's struggling. She didn't ask me, she asked him. Like I was a child or a pet that couldn't speak. David looked at me, embarrassment flickering in his eyes. "Mom, put the menu down. I'll order for you. You don't need to stare at it like that." I lowered the menu, feeling the heat rise in my neck. "I'm fine," I lied, "just tired eyes." But it wasn't just tired eyes. My glasses were 6 years old. The prescription was long gone. I had known for months that I needed a new exam and new frames. But the eye doctor wanted $200 just for the visit. $200 was exactly the amount I had sent David for his birthday last month so he could go out for drinks with his colleagues. I had chosen his celebration over my sight. And now, sitting across from him, I was being pitied for it. "We should really get her an appointment with Dr. Evans," Jessica said to David, ignoring me completely. "He's the best. I can pull some strings." "That would be great, Jess." "Thank you," David said, looking at her with pure adoration. I sat there, invisible in my floral dress, watching my son look at this woman. He didn't look at her the way he used to look at me, with trust and safety. He looked at her with desperation. He wanted to be part of her world so badly that he was willing to let her dissect his mother right in front of him. That dinner was the beginning of the project. Jessica didn't hate me. Hate would have been passionate. Hate would have implied I was a threat. No, Jessica saw me as a charity case, a fixer-upper. Over the next 2 years, as they got engaged and then married, the dynamic solidified. I was the embarrassing relative who had to be managed. When I visited their new, expansive apartment in the city, a place with white carpets that terrified me, Jessica would hover. "Oh, Mrs. Miller, let me take your coat," she would say, whisking away my worn wool jacket before anyone could see the frayed cuffs. "Oh, Mrs. Miller, use a coaster, please. That table is Italian marble." And David, my defender, the boy who had punched a bully for calling me a checkout lady. He agreed with everything she said. "Yeah, Mom, get with the times," he would say, checking his watch. "Jess is right." Then the visit stopped. "It's just too far, Mom," David told me on the phone one day. "And honestly, the apartment, it smells like old cabbage. Jessica has allergies. It's better if we meet out." Old cabbage. I looked around my clean, tiny kitchen. I scrubbed that place every day. It smelled of lemon and hard work, but to him, it smelled like poverty. So we stopped meeting at my home. The sanctuary where I had raised him, the walls that had sheltered us from the cold, became a no-go zone. Our conversations became shorter, surface level. He became a stranger who wore my son's face. The silence stretched. My eyesight got worse. I started bumping into furniture in my own apartment. I burned my hand on the stove because I couldn't see the flame clearly. But I didn't tell him. Why would I? He was busy. He had partners to impress. I didn't want to be another problem for Jessica to fix. Then came the phone call in early December. I saw his name on the caller ID and my heart leaped. I cleared my throat, trying to sound happy and not desperate. David, hello. Hey, Mom, he said. There was no warmth in it. It sounded rehearsed. Listen, Jessica and I were talking. Yes. We're hosting Christmas Eve this year. At the new house, the big one. They had just bought a massive estate in the suburbs. A mansion, really. Oh, that sounds wonderful, I said. Yeah, well, we're having a lot of people over, he continued, his voice speeding up. Jessica's parents, her boss, some colleagues. It's going to be formal. Formal, I repeated. Yeah, so we want you to come, obviously. But he paused. Mom, please, just try to blend in. Don't tell the stories about the poverty stuff. Don't bring up the old days. These people come from money. It makes everyone uncomfortable. It felt like a slap. Don't be yourself. Don't be my mother. Be a prop. I understand, I said softly. And maybe buy a new dress, he added. Jessica found one online she thinks would be appropriate. She sent you the link. Something that doesn't look like, thrift store. Okay, David, I'll look. Great, be there at 6, don't be late. He hung up. I walked to my computer and opened the email from Jessica. I clicked the link. It was a simple navy blue dress. Elegant, understated. I looked at the price, $450. I stared at the screen, tears blurring the numbers even more than my bad eyes already did. $450. That was my rent for 2 weeks. That was my heating bill for the entire winter. I sat there in the dark, doing the math I had done my entire life. If I bought this dress, I couldn't pay the electric bill this month. I would have to eat oatmeal for dinner for 6 weeks. I wondered for a moment if I should call him and say no. But then I imagined his face. I imagined him looking at me with that pity, that shame. I will not shame him, I thought. I will eat oatmeal. I will sit in the dark. But I will not look like a pauper at his table. I clicked purchase. My hands were shaking. I sat there holding my credit card, feeling a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. I wasn't being invited to a family gathering. I was being summoned to a performance. I wasn't walking into a party. I was walking into a trial where the verdict had already been decided, guilty of being poor. The weeks leading up to Christmas Eve were a quiet kind of torture. To pay off the credit card bill for that $450 navy dress, I went back to the old ways. I turned the thermostat down to 60 degrees. I wore 2 sweaters inside to stop the shivering. I ate oatmeal for breakfast and dinner, and for lunch, I had a hard-boiled egg. It was strange. I was 68 years old, living in a country of plenty, yet I was voluntarily starving myself again. But this time, it wasn't to feed my son's stomach. It was to feed his ego. I was paying for the privilege of not embarrassing him. When December 24th finally arrived, the sky was a bruised purple, heavy with unshed snow. I put on the dress. It fit, but it felt cold against my skin. The fabric was stiff, synthetic, and unforgiving. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me didn't look like me. She looked like a prop. A quiet, well-dressed older lady who wouldn't cause a scene. I put on my coat, my good wool one, though the lining was tearing at the shoulder, and walked out to my car. The drive to David and Jessica's new estate took over an hour. As I left the city and entered the suburbs, the houses grew further apart, the driveways longer, the fences higher. My old sedan, with its rattling muffler and rusted wheel wells, felt like an intruder in this land of silent, gleaming luxury. Every time the car coughed, I flinched, hoping it wouldn't die before I reached the fortress. When I finally pulled up to their house, my breath hitched. It wasn't a house, it was a statement. It was a massive, white-pillared colonial that looked like something out of a magazine. The windows were glowing with warm, golden light. A wreath the size of a tractor tire hung on the front door. I parked my car down the street, around the corner. I told myself it was to leave space for the other guests, but the truth was, I was ashamed. I didn't want my rust bucket sitting next to the Mercedes and Range Rovers in the driveway. I didn't want the valet to look at my car with that pitying sneer. I walked the rest of the way in the freezing wind, clutching my purse, my eyes watering from the cold. I rang the doorbell. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The door swung open, and there was Jessica. She looked radiant in a red silk gown, holding a glass of champagne. "Mrs. Miller, you made it," she said, her smile bright but not reaching her eyes. She leaned in for an air kiss, careful not to let her cheek touch mine. "And look at you. That dress is very appropriate. Much better." Much better, as if the version of me that existed before this dress was a mistake that had been corrected. "Thank you, Jessica," I said, stepping into the foyer. "The house is beautiful." "Oh, it's a work in progress," she dismissed with a wave of her hand, though everything looked perfect. Come in, come in. Everyone is in the great room." I followed her. The floors were polished wood, so shiny they looked wet. I walked carefully, terrified of slipping in my old heels. My eyesight, already poor, struggled to adjust from the dark street to the bright chandeliers. The room was a blur of light and color. I couldn't see faces clearly, just shapes. David was standing by the fireplace, talking to a tall, silver-haired man who I assumed was Jessica's father. David looked dashing in a velvet blazer, a drink in his hand. He looked like he belonged here. He looked like he had been born in this room. He saw me and stiffened. I saw it, the momentary tightening of his jaw before he forced a smile. He excused himself and walked over. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "you're here." "Merry Christmas, Davy," I said, reaching out to hug him. He hugged me quickly, stiffly, and then pulled back, his eyes darting to my coat. "Let's get that coat off you," he said, peeling it from my shoulders almost aggressively. "The lining is ripping, Mom. Did you know that?" "Oh, it's just a small tear," I whispered. "Well, let's hide it in the closet," he muttered, marching it away like it was evidence of a crime. I watched him shove it onto a hanger. That coat had kept me warm for 10 winters. It had cost $40 at a discount barn. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that my coat cost less than the bottle of wine he was currently pouring into a crystal decanter. He turned back to the room, raising his voice to a cheerful boom. "Everyone, this is my mother, Mrs. Miller." The room turned. There were about 10 people. They were all holding crystal glasses. They all smiled politely. It was a sea of expensive teeth and sympathetic nods. "Charmed," someone said. "Lovely to meet you," said another. I felt small. I felt like a child who had been allowed to sit at the grown-ups' table on the condition of total silence. I navigated the room, clutching a glass of sparkling water Jessica had pressed into my hand. My hand was trembling, a familial tremor that had gotten worse with age and stress. The ice in my glass clinked softly against the sides, a tiny, betraying rhythm. Clink, clink, clink. I found a corner and stood there, trying to look pleasant. I couldn't see well enough to recognize who was talking to whom, so I just smiled at the blur. "Can I help in the kitchen?" I asked David when he passed by to refill a drink. I was desperate for something to do with my hands, something useful. David stopped. He looked stressed. There was a sheen of sweat on his forehead. "No, Mom," he said sharply. "We have caterers, just mingle, don't hide in the corner." "I'm not hiding," I said, though I was. "I just wanted to help." "You can help by relaxing," he snapped. Then he lowered his voice, leaning into my ear. "And please, hold your glass with 2 hands if you have to. The clinking is driving me crazy. It sounds like a distress signal." He walked away. I looked down at my shaking hand. I wrapped both hands around the glass, suffocating the noise, just as I had suffocated my needs for 30 years. An hour passed. My feet hurt in the heels. My stomach rumbled. I hadn't eaten since the oatmeal at breakfast to ensure the dress wouldn't feel tight. Finally, Jessica clapped her hands. "Dinner is served." We moved into the dining room. It was magnificent, but terrifying. A long mahogany table set with charger plates, 3 forks per person, and a centerpiece so large I couldn't see across it. "Mrs. Miller, you're sitting there," Jessica said, pointing to a seat next to her father, Mr. Sterling. I sat down. Mr. Sterling turned to me. He was a man who smelled of cigars and old money. "So, Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice booming, "David tells me you're retired. What did you do before?" Panic flared in my chest. "Don't tell the poverty stories." I worked in service," I began, my voice small. "Customer service and—" "She was in management, actually," David interrupted from the head of the table. His voice was smooth, confident. "Retail management. She oversaw operations for a large chain." I froze. Operations. Large chain. I worked the register at a grocery store and scrubbed floors. I looked at David. He didn't look at me. He took a sip of his Pinot Noir. He had turned my years of aching feet and scanning coupons into a title that sounded clean. He washed my history away with a sip of expensive wine. Mr. Sterling nodded, impressed. "Ah, very good." I was alone again. I looked down at the table setting. It was a minefield. The wine glasses were impossibly tall and thin. The stems looked like spun sugar, so delicate that if you breathed on them wrong, they would snap. To my failing eyes, they were just glimmers of light, practically invisible against the white tablecloth until it was too late. David cleared his throat. He raised his glass for a toast. The table went quiet. "To family," he said, smiling at everyone, at Jessica, at Mr. Sterling. His eyes swept over me last. The smile didn't stick. "To success," he continued, raising the glass higher. "And to the people who helped us get here, in their own way." The tone was unmistakable. He didn't mean helped. He meant the people we had to drag along. I raised my glass, my hand shaking so bad the water rippled like a dark ocean. I stared at the invisible, fragile stem of the wine glass next to me, praying my hand wouldn't betray me. The soup was warm, but the room had suddenly gone very, very cold. The soup course was cleared, and the main course arrived. It was something elaborate, duck with a cherry reduction, I think David called it. To me, it looked like a small, dark island in a sea of white porcelain. I kept my head down. I focused entirely on the mechanics of eating. Cut, lift, chew, don't look up. The conversation around the table had shifted to real estate. Mr. Sterling was talking about a property in the Caymans. Jessica was complaining about the property tax on their summer home. I felt a familiar urge, a muscle memory from 40 years of survival. I looked at the heavy linen napkin in my lap. It was beautiful fabric, thick and starched. Instinctively, without even thinking, I started to smooth it out. In my mind, I wasn't at a fancy dinner party. I was back in our drafty apartment, folding the few nice things we owned to make them last. I folded the corner, smoothing the crease with my thumb, trying to save the pristine whiteness of it, treating it like a precious object that shouldn't be soiled. It was a nervous tick, a habit of the poor: preserve everything. "Mom, stop." David's voice cut through the air like a whip. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to silence the entire table. He was staring at my hands. He gestured to his wife and their wealthy friends, rolling his eyes theatrically. "Mom, stop," he snapped. "You're hoarding that napkin like it's a ration card. We aren't on welfare anymore. Stop acting like a pauper, it's embarrassing everyone." The room went dead silent. The guests looked down at their plates. The phrase ration card hung in the air. He hadn't just called me cheap, he had weaponized our history. He had taken the most painful, desperate mindset I had developed to keep him alive, the need to save every scrap, and turned it into a punchline about bad manners. Heat rushed up my neck, burning my cheeks. I dropped the napkin immediately, my hands trembling violently now. I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't realize." "Clearly," David muttered, taking a sip of his wine. He didn't look at me. He looked annoyed, like I was a stain on his perfect evening. I needed water. My throat felt like it was closing up. The lump in my throat was so big I couldn't breathe. I just wanted to wash away the shame. I reached for my water glass, but my eyes were swimming with unshed tears, and the candlelight was fracturing in the crystal. The table was a blur of glimmering lights, and my hand in my hand wouldn't stop shaking. The tremor was uncontrollable now, fueled by the adrenaline of humiliation. I misjudged the distance. My knuckles brushed against the bowl of the wine glass sitting, just inches to the right of my water. It happened in slow motion. I saw the delicate stem tilt. I saw the dark red liquid, a Cabernet that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, launch into the air. Crash! The sound of shattering crystal was violent in the quiet room. The wine exploded across the pristine white tablecloth like a gunshot wound. It splashed onto the centerpiece of winter roses. It splattered onto the cuff of Mr. Sterling's white shirt. And it soaked into the lap of my new $450 dress, turning the navy fabric black with cold wetness. For a heartbeat, there was total silence. NCE, the kind of silence that rings in your ears. "Oh my God," Jessica gasped, jumping up and pushing her chair back. "The linen, that's imported Italian linen." She didn't ask if I was cut. She didn't ask if I was okay. She stared at the tablecloth like it was a dying relative. I sat there, frozen, my hand still suspended in the air. I could feel the cold wine seeping through my dress to my skin. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. I'm so sorry," I stammered, grabbing the napkin, the same napkin I had just been scolded for holding and dabbing frantically at the spill. I didn't see it. The glass, it was invisible. I looked at David. This was the moment. This was the moment where my son, the boy I had carried through the snow, the boy whose fevered brow I had kissed, should have stood up. He should have said, "It's okay, Mom. Accidents happen. Let me help you." He didn't. David sat back in his chair. He didn't look concerned. He looked furious. He looked at me the way you look at a dog that has just soiled the rug. He let out a long, loud sigh that echoed in the quiet room. He picked up his own napkin and dabbed his mouth slowly, shaking his head. Then he smiled, a cruel, entertaining smile for his guests. He decided to save the mood by sacrificing me. "Well," he announced, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "I guess that's what happens when you take the training wheels off. It's like dining with a toddler, isn't it?" A few guests chuckled nervously. They were relieved. The host was making a joke, so it was okay to laugh. But David wasn't done. He was enjoying the audience. He leaned forward. "Honestly, Mom, you're becoming a liability. I spend a fortune on your rent. You'd think I could pay someone to hold your cup for you. Maybe next year we just set you up with a sippy cup and a bib. It would save me a fortune in dry cleaning." The room exploded into laughter. I watched him as he said it, and that was the part that killed me. He didn't look at me when he made the joke. He looked at Mr. Sterling. He looked at Jessica's father, checking to see if the big man was laughing. He wasn't teasing his mother. He was auditioning for his father-in-law. He sold his mother's dignity to buy a laugh from a rich stranger. Mr. Sterling clapped David on the shoulder, wiping wine from his cuff. "Good one, Dave. Sippy cup, I love it. My mother was the same way before we had to, put her in the home. Loses the marbles, then the motor skills." "Exactly," David said, still grinning, basking in the approval. "Losing her marbles, that's the technical term." I sat there and I felt something inside me shatter. It broke louder than the wine glass. It wasn't my pride. My pride had died years ago when I started scrubbing toilets to pay his tuition. It was my heart. I looked at him, he was grinning. He had used my frailty, the frailty caused by years of hard labor for him, as a punchline. He had called me a liability. I remembered walking 5 miles in the snow so he could have a winter coat. I remembered eating popcorn for dinner so he could have meat. I remembered the clove oil burning my gums. And now I was a liability, a toddler, a joke. The laughter died down and people went back to eating, cutting around the red stains on the tablecloth. No one looked at me. I was the mess that had been acknowledged and dismissed. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt thin and expensive, and my lungs were too poor to breathe it. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the floor. My voice cracked. I cleared it and tried again, clinging to the last shred of dignity I had left. "I need to use the restroom. Please excuse me." "Down the hall, second door on the left," Jessica said without looking up from her duck. "Try not to touch the silk wallpaper, Mrs. Miller. Your hands are wine-stained." I stood up. My knees were shaking so badly I almost fell. I walked out of the dining room, feeling the eyes of 10 strangers burning into my back. I walked past the Christmas tree with its perfect, color-coordinated ornaments. I walked past the framed photos of David and Jessica on vacation in Paris, looking happy and rich. I found the bathroom and locked the door. I didn't turn on the light. I couldn't bear to look at myself in the mirror. I couldn't bear to see the fool in the $400 dress. I sank down onto the cold tile floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The wine was wet and sticky on my leg. The sound of their laughter was still ringing in my ears. I sat there in the dark, in the most beautiful bathroom I had ever seen, and for the first time in 40 years, I didn't just feel poor. I felt completely, utterly discarded. I waited for a knock. I waited for David to come and say, "Mom, I'm sorry. I went too far." But the only sound was the muffled clinking of silverware from the dining room, and the laughter of my son, continuing the party why. Without me, he had finally erased me. And as I sat there, shivering on the floor, listening to the silence of my own breaking heart, I made a decision. I wasn't going to stay for dessert, and I certainly wasn't going to stay to be his punchline ever again. The bathroom mirror was framed in gold leaf, illuminated by sconces that cast a soft, flattering light. But the face staring back at me didn't look flattered. It looked gray. It looked hollow. It looked like a woman who had just realized she had spent her life building a house on sand. I stood there for a long time, gripping the edge of the marble sink, listening to the muffled sounds of the party continuing in the dining room. I heard the clinking of silverware. I heard a burst of laughter, David's laugh, loud and performative. They hadn't stopped. The party hadn't paused. My exit hadn't created a void, it had solved a problem. The liability had removed herself, and now the adults could enjoy their wine without worrying about the toddlers spilling it. I looked down at my dress. The wine stain was a dark, spreading bruise against the navy fabric. I grabbed a plush hand towel monogrammed with a D and J and tried to dab at it. But the wine had already soaked through to the synthetic fibers. It was set, just like the stain on my heart was set. I realized then that I couldn't go back out there. I couldn't walk back into that room, sit in that heavy chair, and pretend that my son hadn't just gutted me for sport. I unlocked the bathroom door quietly. I waited for a swell of conversation to cover the sound of my footsteps, and then I slipped down the hallway, past the dining room, and into the guest bedroom where I was supposed to sleep that night. The room was freezing, not because the heat wasn't on. The thermostat on the wall read 72 degrees, but because it was a showroom, not a home. The bed was made with military precision, piled high with decorative pillows that looked like they had never been touched. The furniture was sharp-edged and modern. There were no photos, no personal touches. It was a room designed for strangers. I sat on the edge of the bed. My old tote bag, the one David had glared at when I walked in, was sitting on the floor. I pulled my knees to my chest and wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stop the shaking. And then the tears finally came. They didn't come as a scream. They came as a silent, chest-heaving sob that hurt my ribs. I cried for the $450 I had wasted on this dress. I cried for the oatmeal dinners. I cried for the years I spent walking in the rain. But mostly, I cried for the boy I had lost. I sat there in the dark, rocking back and forth, and I asked myself the question that every mother fears more than death. Did I do this? Did I raise a monster? I thought about the little boy who saved me a cracker. I thought about the 10-year-old who fought a bully to defend my honor. Where had he gone? And then the terrible realization hit me. It settled on my chest like a lead weight. I hadn't just raised him, I had curated him. I had shielded him so perfectly, so completely, that he had no concept of what the shield was made of. I had hidden the hunger. I had hidden the fear. I had hidden the bills. I had painted over the cracks in our life with a smile and a song so he would never feel poor. And it worked too well. He didn't respect my survival because he never saw the danger. To him, my poverty wasn't a heroic sacrifice, it was just a bad habit. He looked at my coupon clipping and saw greed, not desperation. He looked at my fear of expensive menus and saw stupidity, not trauma. I had built a man who stood on a mountain of my bones, and he thought he was flying. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. The anger was starting to rise now, mixing with the grief. It was a cold, quiet anger. I am not a liability, I whispered to the empty room. I am the reason you are alive. I looked at the digital clock on the bedside table. 8:45 p.m. The party would go on for hours. Then they would open gifts. Then they would sleep. I imagined the morning. I imagined walking into that pristine kitchen, facing Jessica and David over coffee. I imagined David's casual, gaslighting apology. "Oh, come on, Mom, can't you take a joke? You were being dramatic." I couldn't do it. I couldn't face his dismissal again. I stood up, my legs were steady now. I wasn't staying. I reached for the zipper of the navy dress. I peeled it off my body. It felt like shedding a layer of toxic skin. Habit told me to look for a hanger. Habit told me to fold it, to try and save it, to be grateful for the expensive thing. But I didn't. I dropped the dress. It landed in a wet, heavy heap right in the center of the pristine white carpet. The red wine stain looked violent against the wool rug. Let Jessica clean it up, I thought bitterly. Let them see the mess they made. I put on my old clothes, the comfortable slacks and the sweater I had, worn for the drive over. They smelled like my apartment. They smelled like safety. I went to the closet and retrieved my coat, the one with the ripped lining that David had hidden away like a shameful secret. I put it on, buttoning it all the way to the chin. I picked up my tote bag, ready to leave. But then I felt the weight of the metal tin at the bottom. I froze. I had forgotten about the tin. When David had invited me, I had gone into my closet and found an old cookie tin, a rusted blue Danish butter cookie container. It wasn't full of cookies. It was full of us. I had brought it because I thought, foolishly, that we might have a moment. I thought maybe, after the fancy dinner, we could sit by the fire and I could show him. I wanted to show him the old photos. I wanted to laugh about the camping nights. But mixed in with the photos were other things. Things I had kept because I was a hoarder of memories. I sat on the bed and opened the lid. There was a photo of him at 7. But underneath that, there was the paperwork of our survival. There was the receipt from the pawn shop for my grandmother's locket, dated the day after he fainted at school. There was the dental bill I never paid, with past due stamped in red ink, tucked inside an envelope with a note I had written to myself. Do not pay. Send cash to David for books. And there, right on top, was a napkin from 1995. I picked it up. My handwriting was younger, but the ink was still clear. December 24th, 1995, it read. David got the Power Ranger toy he wanted so badly. I paid the electric bill late to afford it. We are eating lights out tonight so he can play. He looks so happy. Worth it. I stared at the napkin. That was the night he thought was magical. That was the night he thought we were camping. He remembered the toy. I remembered the darkness. I looked at these papers. These were the receipts of my love. These were the proofs of purchase for the life he was currently living. I closed the lid. I didn't want to take the box back with me. It was too heavy. I was done carrying the weight of our past alone. I made a decision. I placed the rusted cookie tin on the bed, right next to the pillows. It looked ugly against the luxury. It looked out of place, just like me. I didn't write a note. I didn't need to. The silence was loud enough. I grabbed my purse. I checked the hallway. It was clear. I slipped out the back door of the kitchen into the freezing night air. The wind hit my face, drying the tear tracks on my cheeks. It was bitter cold, but it felt clean. I walked to my car, parked down the street in the shadows. It started with a reluctant groan and a loud, rattling cough from the muffler. As I pulled away from the curb, I looked back one last time. Through the large bay window of the dining room, I could see the silhouette of David. He was standing at the head of the table, a glass of wine in his hand, throwing his head back in laughter. He was surrounded by light and warmth and people who thought he was wonderful. He didn't even know his mother was gone. He didn't know his world was about to collapse. I turned the corner and the house disappeared from my rearview mirror. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't regret. It was relief. I had left my dignity at the door when I walked in, but I was taking it back as I drove away. I was done being the punchline. I had left him the only gift I had left to give. I left him the truth. And I knew, with a grim satisfaction, that when he opened that box, the laughter in that house was going to stop forever. I wasn't there to see what happened when the music stopped. I was driving my rattling sedan down the interstate, crying into the steering wheel, putting miles between myself and the son I thought I had lost. but I know my son. And years later, in the quiet moments of reconciliation, he told me exactly what happened in that house after I left. He told me every detail, because confessing it was the only way he could scrub the guilt from his soul. The party didn't last much longer after I excused myself. There is a specific kind of energy in a room when an elderly woman is humiliated, even if the guests laugh. There is a sour aftertaste. The laughter feels brittle. The wine tastes a little too acidic. One by one, the guests made their excuses. The sippy cup joke had landed, but the echo of it was uncomfortable. By 10:00 p.m., the house was quiet. The caterers were packing up the crystal. Jessica was in the kitchen, complaining about the wine stain on the tablecloth, wondering if club soda would get it out. David poured himself one last glass of scotch. He felt restless. He told me he felt a strange itch in the back of his mind, a feeling that something was off. He told himself he was just annoyed with me. He told himself he was going to go to the guest room and give me a lecture. He wanted to tell me that my dramatic exit to the bathroom was childish. He walked down the hallway, his footsteps heavy on the plush carpet. He prepared his opening line. "Mom, come on, you have to learn to take a joke." He pushed open the door to the guest bedroom. "Mom," he said, expecting to see me sitting on the bed, sulking. The room was empty. The bed was perfectly made, the pillows untouched. Then he looked down. There, in the center of the white carpet, lay the navy blue dress. I hadn't folded it. I had dropped it in a wet, heavy heap. The red wine stain had bled onto the white rug, creating a stark, violent contrast. It didn't look like a spill anymore. It looked like a wound. It looked like someone had melted away, leaving only their clothes behind. And as David stood there, staring at that dark bruise on the floor, the silence in the room became deafening. It was so loud, it felt like a distress signal, the very signal he had mocked an hour ago. Only now he realized he had ignored it until it was too late. "Mom," he called out again, checking the bathroom. Dark, empty. He went back to the bedroom. That's when he saw it. Sitting in the exact center of the bed, ugly, and rusted against the high thread count duvet, was the blue Danish butter cookie tin. David walked over to it slowly. He recognized the tin. It used to sit on top of our refrigerator when he was a boy. He remembered standing on a chair, trying to reach it, hoping for a cookie, only to find sewing needles and thread inside. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He set his scotch on the nightstand. He reached out and opened the lid. The smell hit him first, the smell of old paper in our apartment. It smelled like vanilla and dust. He expected photos, and there were photos. The first one on top was a picture of him at graduation, smiling, oblivious to the fact that I was wearing shoes with holes in the soles so I could buy him the frame. But underneath the photo lay the papers. He picked up the first scrap, the napkin I had written on in 1995. He read it. December 24th, 1995. David got the Power Ranger toy he wanted so badly. I paid the electric bill late to afford it. We are eating lights out tonight so he can play. He looks so happy. Worth it. David froze. He told me the air left his lungs. He remembered that Christmas. He remembered the power outage. He remembered me telling him the storm had knocked out the lines. He remembered playing with his toy by candlelight, thinking it was a grand adventure. He hadn't been camping, he had been poor, and I had sat in the dark so he could shine. His hands started to tremble. He reached for the next paper. It was the receipt from the pawn shop. Item, gold locket vintage, payout, $40. Date, February 12, 1983. He stared at the date. He knew that date. It was his birthday week. It was the week he had fainted in school. He remembered the roast chicken dinner that night. He remembered devouring the crispy skin, feeling so full and happy. He looked at the receipt. He looked at the price of his mother's only heirloom. "I ate the locket," he whispered to the empty room. "I ate her mother's necklace." He dug deeper into the box. He was frantic now. He was looking for evidence that he wasn't a monster, but every piece of paper confirmed that he was. He found the dental bill, the one with the red past due stamp, the one for the root canal I never got. He found the envelope clipped to it. Inside was a bank transfer receipt. Amount $300, sent to David Miller. Memo for books. He remembered the $300. He remembered using it to rent a convertible for a weekend trip to the beach with his fraternity brothers. He remembered the wind in his hair, the laughter, the feeling of being young and rich. And then the image shifted. He pictured me. He pictured me in our dark kitchen, holding my jaw, rocking back and forth in the silence, the smell of clove oil filling the room. He pictured me waiting for the pain to stop just enough so I could go to work to earn the money he was currently spending on gas for a joyride. He had been laughing in the sun while I was rotting in the dark. He found a small index card where I had written down the math of my grocery shopping. Bread, 89 cents. Milk, $1.29. If I skip lunch on Tuesday and Thursday, I can buy the good peanut butter he likes. He read the math of his own survival. He saw the mathematician of misery at work. He saw that every calorie he had consumed, every shirt on his back, every book in his bag, had been paid for in the currency of my deprivation. And just an hour ago, he had called me a liability. He had called me a toddler because my hand shook. He looked at his own hand. It was shaking violently. He dropped the papers onto the bed. He felt sick, physically sick. The expensive duck dinner he had just eaten churned in his stomach. The scotch tasted like poison. He stood up, gasping for air. He felt the walls of the expensive house closing in on him. The white carpet, the silk wallpaper, the crystal, it all looked cheap now. It looked like garbage, because none of it was real. The only real thing in his life was the woman he had just chased out into the snow. The door opened. Jessica walked in. She was holding a bottle of club soda and a rag. "David, honestly," she sighed, looking at the wine stain on the carpet. "This is going to cost a fortune to clean. I told you we shouldn't have used the white rug. Your mother is she's just destructive." David didn't move. He stood with his back to her, staring at the rusted tin. "David," Jessica stepped closer. She saw the pile of old, yellowed papers on the bed. What is that? Did she leave her trash behind? God, she really is a hoarder. Just put it in a garbage bag. The cleaning crew comes tomorrow." She reached out to grab the napkin, the one about the Power Ranger. David spun around. He didn't yell, he didn't scream. But the look in his eyes stopped her cold. It was a look of absolute, terrifying clarity. "Don't touch it," he said. His voice was a low growl. Jessica flinched. "Excuse me." "Don't you dare touch it." David stepped between her and the bed. "It's not trash." "David, you're drunk." Jessica rolled her eyes. "It's a pile of receipts. It's depressing. Just throw it away and come to bed." "It's not receipts," David said, his voice cracking. Tears were streaming down his face now, hot and fast. "It's the bill." "The bill? What are you talking about?" "The bill for my life?" David shouted. The sound tore through the polite silence of the house. "This is what it cost. The house, the degree, the suit I'm wearing, this is what it cost." She didn't buy it with money, Jessica. She bought it with her blood. She bought it with her teeth. She bought it with her dignity. He grabbed the dental bill and shoved it toward her. She walked around with a rotting tooth for a year so I could buy textbooks. And I used the money to rent a car. I laughed at her. I laughed at her for holding a napkin because she was afraid of ruining it. Do you know why she does that? Do you know why? He was sobbing now, his composure completely shattered. The successful businessman was gone. The arrogant host was gone. Because for 20 years, she didn't own a single thing that wasn't secondhand. And I sat there and called her a toddler. He sank to his knees. He buried his face in the duvet right next to the rusted box. Jessica stood there, stunned. For the first time, her face softened. The mask of the perfect hostess slipped. She realized she wasn't looking at a drunk man. She was looking at a man who had just seen his own soul and found it wanting. "David," she whispered. "I have to go," David gasped, scrambling to his feet. He wiped his face, smearing the tears. "I have to go to her." "David, it's almost midnight. It's Christmas Eve. You can't drive to the city now." "I don't care." David grabbed his keys. "She's alone. She's alone in that apartment because I drove her away. I have to fix it." He grabbed the cookie tin. He held it to his chest like it was the Holy Grail. He ran out of the room, leaving the navy dress on the floor and his wife standing in the silence. He told me later that the drive to the city was the longest hour of his life. He drove the speed limit, terrified that if he drove too fast, he would crash and die before he could say the words he needed to say. He rehearsed 1,000 speeches. But as he pulled up to my building, the building he had refused to visit for 2 years because it smelled like cabbage, he realized that speeches were useless. He saw the light in my window. I was awake. He killed the engine. He sat in his luxury car, clutching the rusted box, looking up at the 4th floor. He wasn't the master of the universe anymore. He was just a boy who had lost his way, praying that the door was still open. He got out of the car and walked to the entrance. He didn't buzz. He still had his key. He had kept it on his ring, ignored but never discarded. He opened the heavy front door and started up the stairs. He didn't take the elevator. He walked the 4 flights, punishing himself, feeling the burn in his legs, remembering the thousands of times I had walked these stairs with heavy grocery bags so he wouldn't have to carry them. He reached my door. He raised his hand to knock. But his hand was shaking. He stood there in the hallway, the silence heavy around him. He took a breath, and then he knocked. Knock, knock, knock. It was a soft sound. But to me, sitting alone in my chair, staring at the wall, it sounded like a thunderclap. It sounded like the past coming back to ask for forgiveness. I stood up, wiped my face, and walked to the door. I didn't know who it was, but when I opened it, I didn't see a businessman in a velvet blazer. I saw my son. He was on his knees on the dirty hallway carpet, and he was holding the rusted cookie tin up to me with both hands, like an offering, like a penance. I stood in the doorway of my apartment, clutching the collar of my sweater against the draft. The hallway was cold, smelling faintly of the neighbors' burnt onions and old carpet. But right then, the only thing I could smell was the expensive cologne of the man kneeling at my feet. David didn't look like a master of the universe anymore. His velvet blazer was rumpled. His hair, usually gelled to perfection, was wild and windblown. But it was his face that broke me. His face was wet, his eyes red and swollen, stripped of all that hard, shiny armor he had spent 20 years building. He held the rusted blue cookie tin up toward me. His hands were shaking harder than mine ever had. "Mom," he choked out. It wasn't the voice of the businessman. It was the voice of the 7-year-old boy who had scraped his knee and needed to be told it would stop hurting. I didn't know. I looked at him. I looked at the boy I had raised, the man who had mocked me, and the stranger who had returned. Part of me, the wounded part that had spent the last 2 hours crying in a car, wanted to close the door. I wanted to tell him that he was too late, that the liability was closed for business. But a mother's heart is a treacherous thing. It breaks, and yet it still beats for the one who broke it. "Get up, David," I said softly. "I can't," he sobbed, his head dropping forward until his forehead rested against the cold, rusted metal of the box. "I can't stand up. I don't deserve to stand up in front of you." "Get up," I repeated, firmer this time. I reached out and took the box from his hands. I set it on the small entryway table. Then I took his hands, those smooth, uncalloused hands that had never scrubbed a floor, and I pulled him to his feet. He stumbled into the apartment. He looked around. For years, he had told me this place was depressing. He had told me it smelled like cabbage and poverty. But tonight, he didn't pinch his nose. He breathed in the air like it was oxygen. He looked at the worn armchair, the small TV, the handmade Afghan on the sofa. He looked at it and saw it for what it was, a fortress of safety. He collapsed onto the sofa. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. Habits in a crisis, you make tea. When I came back with 2 mugs, he was sitting with his head in his hands. He looked up when I set the mug down. "I read the receipts," he whispered. "I saw the pawn ticket, the locket." I sat down in my armchair, facing him. "I didn't keep them to hurt you, David." "I know," he said quickly. "You kept them because they were the truth, and I've been living a lie." He took a jagged breath, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "I thought I made myself, Mom. I walked around thinking I was this self-made man. I thought I was better than you because I knew how to order wine and you didn't. I thought I was strong and you were weak because you held a napkin too tight." He looked at his hands, disgusted. "But I was standing on your shoulders the whole time. You were starving in the dark so I could play with a plastic toy. You were rotting in pain so I could drive a convertible." He looked me in the eye, and the pain in his gaze was visceral. "I called you a toddler," he said, his voice breaking on the word. "I made fun of your hands, the hands that scrubbed floors for me, the hands that held me when I was sick. I made fun of them to make people laugh. I sold you out, Mom. I sold you for a laugh." "Yes," I said quietly, "you did." I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't say, "It's okay," because it was okay, and he needed to feel the weight of it. "I am so sorry," he wept. He slid off the sofa and onto the floor again, sitting near my feet, resting his cheek against my knee like he used to when he was small. "I am so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But please, please tell me how to fix it. Tell me what to do. I'll buy you a house. I'll buy you 10 houses. I'll hire the best doctors. I'll—" "Stop," I said. I placed my hand on his head, stroking his hair. It was a familiar gesture, one I hadn't done in decades. "I don't want a house, David. I don't want your money. I never wanted your money." "Then what?" he asked, looking up at me with desperate eyes. "What can I give you?" "Respect," I said. The word hung in the air, simple and heavy. "I want you to look at me and see your mother, not an embarrassment," I told him, my voice steady. "I want you to come here to this apartment and drink tea from a chipped mug without looking at your watch. I want you to tell Jessica that this is where you came from and you are proud of it. And if she can't respect that, then she doesn't respect you." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I will, I promise." "And one more thing," I added. I lifted his chin so he had to look at me. My hands shake, David. My eyes are bad. I am old. I am not the warrior I used to be. But I am not a child. I am not a toddler. I am the woman who built you. You will never, ever speak down to me again. Do you understand? I understand, he whispered. I swear to G. Odd Mom, never again. We sat there for a long time. The tea went cold. He cried until he had no tears left, and I held him. We didn't fix 40 years of pain in one night, but we started. He stayed that night. He slept on my lumpy sofa, wrapped in the Afghan, still wearing his ruined velvet blazer. He slept deeply, the way he used to when he was a boy and the world was scary. The next morning, Christmas Day, we didn't have a feast. We had eggs and toast, but it was the best meal I had eaten in years. David called Jessica. I heard him in the kitchen. His voice was different, firm, authoritative, but calm. No, Jess, I'm staying here for Christmas, he said. And when I come home, we need to have a long talk about how we treat people, about how we treat my family. He hung up. He came back to the table and took a bite of his toast. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. Merry Christmas, Mom, he said. Merry Christmas, son. That was 3 years ago. Things are different now. David comes over every Sunday. He doesn't check his watch. He brings me groceries, not because I can't afford them, but because he wants to carry the heavy bags up the stairs for me. He bought me new glasses. He sat with me at the eye doctor, holding my hand during the exam, and when the doctor asked about my history, David said the words I will carry with me to my grave. My mother has bad eyes because she spent her life looking out for me. Jessica and I, we are polite. She treats me with a careful, terrified respect. She knows now that I am not a prop. She knows I am the foundation. She tried to buy my forgiveness, of course. She brought me a cashmere scarf last Christmas. Expensive, soft. I thanked her, but I put it in the closet. I still wear my old wool coat with the mended lining. I don't need her soft things to keep me warm anymore. I have my son back. And me. I am old now. My hands shake more than ever. I still fold my napkins to save them. I still count pennies in my head. You can't unlearn survival. But I am not lonely. I look at my son, and I see the man I always hoped he would be. He had to lose himself to find himself, and we both had to break to be put back together. But we made it. To all the mothers out there listening to this, I know. I know the nights you spent hungry. I know the cold you endured. I know the silent screams you swallowed so your children could laugh. I know the fear that you aren't doing enough and the heartbreak when they grow up and forget. They might forget for a while. The world is loud, and it tells them that money and status are the only things that matter. They might look at your worn-out hands and feel shame instead of gratitude. But love, real, sacrificial, bone-deep mother's love, is the only thing in this world that is truly unbreakable. It waits, it endures, it leaves a receipt. So hold your head up, wear your old coat with dignity, let your hands shake. You have earned every tremor, you have earned every gray hair. You are not invisible, you are the architect of the future. And one day, if you are lucky, and if you leave the light on long enough, they will come home. And if they don't, you save that receipt anyway, because God sees it, and He knows exactly what you paid.